The chill of the stone floor seeped through the thick leather of his boots, a familiar discomfort Corporal Davies had long since learned to ignore. His post was in the shadows of a massive pillar, a position that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the royal family's private chapel. For over an hour, he had stood as still as the carved saints in their alcoves, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceiling, the flickering flames of the tall candles, and the small congregation gathered before the altar. The air was thick with the scent of old incense and beeswax. The occasion was a solemn one. The annual memorial service for the Dowager Queen, a woman Davies had never met, but whose legacy seemed etched into the very stones of the kingdom. The congregation was small, consisting only of the immediate royal family and a few of the late Queen's most elderly and trusted aides. Davies's focus, however, was not on the droning words of the bishop, but on the two other royal guards positioned within the chapel. Sergeant Major Thorne stood rigidly by the main door, a man carved from granite and discipline. Across the aisle, near the family's pews, stood the captain of the guard, Alistair Finch. The air between the three men was thick with unspoken tension, a tension that had nothing to do with the solemnity of the occasion and everything to do with the politics of the palace. A low, angry murmur from the royal pews cut through the bishop's eulogy like a shard of glass. Davies's eyes snapped to the source. The king, a stout man with a florid face, was leaning across his wife, unhissing something at the young woman seated on her other side. That woman was Princess Charlotte, the king's niece, and the only child of the late Dowager Queen's beloved son. She was barely 19, her face pale beneath a simple black veil, but her spine was ramrod straight. She did not cower from her uncle's whispered assault. Instead, she turned her head, and in the quiet of the chapel, her clear, steady voice carried. The late Queen's diadem is not a piece of costume jewelry to be packed away in a vault, Your Majesty. It is a symbol of her life's work and her heritage. It belongs with her personal effects, to be displayed in the museum she founded, as was her written wish. The king's face purpled. A few of the elderly aides shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Davies saw Captain Finch's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, and the bishop faltered for a fraction of a second before continuing his prayer, trying to smooth over the discord with piety. Charlotte's statement was a declaration of war. The Dowager Queen had been a beloved figure, a champion of the arts and education, often at odds with her son's more isolationist and traditionalist views. The king wanted to absorb her legacy, her titles, and her considerable personal property into the crown's main holdings, effectively erasing her independent identity. He wanted the famous diadem, a breathtaking piece set with the legendary Tears of the Moon's sapphires, to be worn by his own wife. Charlotte, the granddaughter the dowager had raised and adored, was the sole obstacle. As the service ended and the royal family filed out, the king shot his niece a look of pure venom. The aides scurried after them, leaving Charlotte standing alone before the altar. Captain Finch approached her, his voice a low, professional murmur. "Your Highness, the king has requested a word with you in his private study. Immediately." Charlotte did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on a small, flickering flame before a statue of the Virgin Mary. "I imagine he has, Captain. Please inform His Majesty that I am saying a private prayer for my grandmother and will attend him shortly." Finch hesitated. It was a subtle act of defiance, a refusal to jump at the king's command. "Your Highness," he said immediately. Finally she turned, and Davies, from his shadowed pillar, saw the fire in her eyes. It was the same fire he had seen in portraits of the Dowager Queen. "And I have said, Captain, that I will attend him shortly. You may wait by the door, or you may leave." The choice is yours." Finch had no choice. He gave a curt bow and retreated to the chapel's entrance, standing beside a stony-faced Sergeant Thorne. Davies watched the young princess. She knelt, made the sign of the cross, and remained with her head bowed for a full 5 minutes. When she rose, her face was composed, a mask of porcelain calm. She walked towards the doors, her silk dress whispering against the stone. As she passed Davies's pillar, she paused, her eyes meeting his for the briefest of moments. It was a look of profound loneliness, but also of unshakable resolve. She was a girl walking into a lion's den, armed with nothing but her grandmother's memory and her own fierce will. And Davies, for the first time in his career, felt a deep, unsettling urge to step out of the shadows and offer his protection, not to the crown, but to the person he believed was right. The following days were a maelstrom of whispered conversations and closed-door meetings. The palace, usually a place of rigid routine, felt like a tinderbox. Corporal Davies found his duties shifting. He was no longer assigned to static posts, but was part of a roving patrol, his path frequently crossing with the young princess as she moved through the long tapestry-lined corridors. He saw the strain on her. The upright posture was a little too rigid, the polite smile a little too fixed. One gray afternoon, he was walking his beat in the less frequented North Wing, home to the Dowager Queen's private library and study, now sealed by the king's order. As he turned a corner, he saw her. Princess Charlotte stood before the ornate locked doors of her grandmother's study, as her hand resting on the gilded handle. She wasn't trying to force it, just touching it, as if trying to feel a connection to the woman on the other side. She looked small and achingly vulnerable in the dim light of the corridor. Before he could discreetly retreat, she spoke without turning. "It smells of her here still. Lavender and old paper." Her voice was soft, meant more for herself than for him. Davies stopped, standing at attention. "Your Highness." She finally turned to face him, recognition flickering in her eyes. "You were in the chapel, the guard by the pillar." He was surprised she remembered. "Yes, Your Highness." A moment of silence stretched between them. "My grandmother used to say that the walls have ears in a palace," she said, a ghost of a sad smile on her lips. But I think she also believed they could have hearts. What do you think, Corporal?" It was a dangerously personal question. He should have deflected, given a stock answer about duty and service. But something in her direct gaze compelled the truth. "I think, Your Highness, that stone and mortar feel nothing. But the people within them, they can choose what they listen to." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine interest replacing the practiced melancholy. "A philosopher in a soldier's uniform, my grandmother would have liked you." She looked back at the locked door. "She built this library herself, collected books from all over the world. The king wants to absorb it into the royal archives. Her work, her passion, will become a forgotten footnote in a catalog." "The diadem," Davies said, at the words out before he could stop them. He was treading on treacherous ground. Charlotte didn't seem to mind. "A symbol, just as this library is a symbol. He doesn't see the value in her independent legacy. He sees it as a challenge to his own authority." She took a deep breath. "The solicitors are drawing up the papers. A legal challenge. It's my only recourse. But it will be my word, my grandmother's written wishes against the entire weight of the crown." "The law is the law, Your Highness," Davies offered, though he knew it was a naive thing to say. In a monarchy, the crown often was the law. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Is it, Corporal? We shall see." She stepped away from the door and began to walk. and he fell into step beside her, a silent shadow. "The captain of the guard has been instructed to keep a close eye on me, to report on my movements, my visitors. I am a person of interest in my own home." "I am only on a routine patrol, Your Highness," he assured her. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I'm talking to you, because you're just doing your job, and you have no reason to want anything from me." They reached a junction in the corridor. She stopped and faced him. "Be careful, Corporal. The stones you walk are becoming more treacherous by the day." She inclined her head in a gesture of dismissal and walked away, disappearing around a corner. That night, Davies was summoned to a private meeting with Captain Finch. The captain's office was sparse and functional. Finch sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. "Corporal Davies, your patrol log indicates you were in the North Wing this afternoon." Davies's heart thumped, but he kept his expression neutral. "Yes, sir. Standard rotation. And while on this standard rotation, you were observed in conversation with the Princess Charlotte. So there were other eyes, other shadows. I encountered Her Highness in the corridor. She made an observation about the weather. I acknowledged her and continued my patrol. The encounter lasted less than a minute." Finch studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "The king is not pleased with the princess's current disposition. It is causing friction. It is our duty to ensure the safety and security of the entire royal family. That includes protecting them from making unwise decisions or from being influenced by unsanctioned opinions." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. "I understand my duty, sir. To protect, without prejudice or opinion." A ghost of a smile touched Finch's lips. "See that you remember that. Dismissed." As Davies left the office, the warning echoing in his ears, his resolve didn't weaken. Instead, it hardened. The king was threatened by a 19-year-old girl and her grandmother's memory. He was using the guard, men like Davies, to intimidate her. The captain's words had backfired. They had shown Davies exactly which side was fighting for justice and which was fighting for control. The encounter in the corridor had forged a silent, perilous bond, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him that his true duty was only just beginning. The tension in the palace reached a fever pitch on the morning of the legal hearing. The king, confident in his victory, had made a grand show of attending, his advisors and lawyers flanking him like a flock of preening crows. Princess Charlotte, accompanied only by her elderly lady-in-waiting, had slipped into the old chancery court through a side door, her face a mask of pale determination. Corporal Davies was part of the external security detail, positioned in the great marble hallway outside the court's oak doors. He could hear nothing of the proceedings, only the muffled murmur of voices, the scrape of a chair, an occasional raised tone that was instantly swallowed by the room's heavy drapes. He stood, a statue in his dress uniform, but his mind was racing. He thought of the Dowager Queen's library, of the tears of the moon diadem, of the look in Charlotte's eyes when she touched the handle of her grandmother's door. After what felt like an eternity, the doors creaked open. The king strode out first, his face a thundercloud of suppressed fury. He didn't glance left or right, his boots clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the marble floor. His advisors scurried after him, their faces a mixture of shock and panic. They did not look like victors. They looked like men who had just seen their invincible general suffer a stunning defeat. A few moments later, Princess Charlotte emerged. She was not smiling, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was the light of vindication. Her solicitor, a small, stooped man with spectacles, was beaming beside her, clutching a sheaf of papers as if they were made of gold.